Hello, my name's Arliss. Last month, my billionaire father-in-law dragged me into a ballroom full of strangers and turned me into a spectacle. He tossed me a set of keys, promised me his Ferrari if I could start it, then spat one word in my face: failure. In that moment, I wasn't a husband, a son-in-law, or even a man. I was his punchline. But what happened next? It didn't just silence him. It broke everything he thought he owned. Want to know how? The first thing I noticed walking into the Rosewood Mansion's ballroom was the smell of polished wood and money. Crystal chandeliers threw soft gold across marble floors so shiny I could see my own shoes reflected back at me. People were gathered in small groups, laughing the kind of laugh that said they'd known each other forever. I'd walked into rooms like this before, but tonight felt colder. Colder in the way a winter wind slides under your coat. I kept my hand on Venora's elbow as we moved through the crowd. She looked beautiful, poised the way her father liked. I could feel her tense under my touch, like she already knew what was coming. She leaned in and whispered, "Just keep your head up." He promised he'd behave tonight. "I'm not worried about him," I said quietly. "I'm used to being invisible." Orville stood near the stage, surrounded by men in dark suits and women dripping in diamonds. His voice carried easily, smooth and rich, like he owned not only the room, but the air inside it. Every time his eyes passed over me, they went flat. No smile, no nod, just a glance like I was furniture he didn't remember buying. He clapped Cullen on the back, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "This is the man carrying our family's legacy," he said. "Cullen has vision. He has grit. He's the one I trust with the future." The guests clapped politely. Some looked at me as if to measure the distance between us. I felt the sting of it, but worse than the words was the silence afterward. That silence pressed on me, made me fade right there in front of everyone. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being erased. Venora tried to meet my eyes, but she couldn't hold them. Her father's voice rolled on. "And tonight," Orville announced, drawing out each word, "I want to celebrate our success with a little surprise." Two staffers rolled out a long, silk-draped shape into the center of the ballroom. The crowd murmured. The lights dimmed, then snapped bright again. With a theatrical tug, Orville yanked the cover away to reveal a gleaming Ferrari. Gasps and whistles rippled through the guests. He held up a set of keys, the chrome catching the light. "This beauty," he said, "is a machine of precision and power. Only someone worthy can handle it." Then, with a smirk, he turned to me and tossed the keys across the space. They landed in my palm heavier than they should have. "You think you belong here?" His voice cut through the murmurs. "Prove it. Start the car. Then maybe you'll be more than a—" He paused just long enough for the crowd to lean in. "Failure." Laughter erupted. Some tried to hide it behind their hands. Others didn't bother. Cullen chuckled openly, his arm draped over the back of a chair like he was watching a show. I stared at the keys, my fingers tightening around them. My throat felt tight, but I kept my face still. Inside, heat climbed up my neck, anger and humiliation twisting together. I could smell the leather interior from where I stood, the car sitting there like a trap. Guests were waiting for me to react. My ears picked up snatches of whispers. Blue-collar boy out of his depth. He married up, didn't he? Every laugh burned into me. I thought of the long nights, the jobs I'd taken to pay off debts they never knew existed. I took one slow breath. I didn't move toward the car. I didn't speak. Silence was the only weapon I had left in that moment. From the outside, maybe it looked like shame. From the inside, it felt like loading a spring. Venora shifted beside me, her hand trembling slightly. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I was fine. But I wasn't. I was standing under a spotlight that wasn't meant to honor me. It was meant to break me. I held the keys loosely now, staring at the Ferrari, the crowd a blur at the edges of my vision. My father-in-law's smirk grew wider. He thought he'd won, and then, in front of everyone, he spat the word that had haunted me my entire life. Failure. The sound of that word didn't echo. It sank. Failure hit me in the face like a slap, heavier than anything Orville had thrown before. For a second, I forgot where I was. The chandeliers, the marble, the low thrum of a string quartet. All I heard was the word, thick and final. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. My fingers tightened around the keys until the edges dug into my skin. I had spent years training myself to stay still in moments like this, to hold it all in. Anger was what he wanted. Silence would make him wonder. The room felt like it had tilted. Guests shifted, some glancing at me, others at their phones, their faces lit by screens. A woman near the bar whispered to a man, eyes darting like she'd been caught staring at an accident. Across the dance floor, someone chuckled, high-pitched, forced. It reminded me of a hyena circling a kill. Venora stood 2 steps to my right. She wasn't looking at me or at her father. She stared at the carpet pattern like it was suddenly fascinating. I knew that look. She was counting the stitches in her mind, anything to keep from reacting. I felt a flicker of pity for her, and then it was gone. Orville's smirk deepened. "You hear me, boy. A man like you doesn't get a seat at this table unless he earns it. You think marrying my daughter makes you one of us?" His voice was smooth enough to butter toast, but his eyes were knives. Cullen laughed openly now, tossing back the last of his drink. "Come on, Arliss," he said loudly. "Show us you've got something under the hood." More laughter. A few of the younger guests started recording, holding their phones high like they were at a concert. I stood there, rooted. Inside, shame and anger swirled like a storm, but underneath them both was something quieter. Resolve. I could feel it forming like a line of steel through my spine. It wasn't just the word, I thought. It was the way it landed, like a nail driven into wood. Every syllable sank deeper. This wasn't about a car. This was about power, about making me small in front of everyone so they'd never forget who controlled the room. Venora finally moved, a small step forward. Her hand reached out halfway, then dropped. "Dad," she said softly. Her voice was thin, but Orville ignored it. He kept his gaze locked on me, feeding on the silence. In that moment, I wasn't a husband or a son-in-law. I wasn't even a man. I was a prop in his show, entertainment for people who'd never lifted anything heavier than a wine glass. The Ferrari gleamed behind him under the lights, blood-red paint catching every flash of a camera. I stared at it and saw not a prize, but a stage prop. It wasn't a symbol of speed or freedom. It was a cage made of leather and steel. My chest felt tight. I could feel sweat on my palms, but I didn't let the keys slip. I thought of the nights I'd worked double shifts, the debts I'd paid down quietly, so Venora's name would never appear on a collection notice. All the things they didn't know. All the things they didn't care to know. Orville stepped closer, lowering his voice so only the front rows heard. "This is who you are. Always will be." His breath smelled of bourbon and expensive cigars. He wanted me to break. Instead, I swallowed once and straightened my shoulders. Anger would give him what he wanted, I told myself. Silence will make him guess. I turned slightly, enough to take in the crowd. Some still laughed, but others shifted uncomfortably. A man at the edge of the room crossed his arms. A woman looked down at her drink, shaking her head. They weren't going to help me. No one was. But I wasn't looking for rescue. I was taking stock. I was memorizing faces, voices, details. The way Orville's cufflink caught the light. The way Cullen's smile faltered when no one joined his laugh. The way Venora's fingers twisted her clutch until her knuckles went white. Every humiliation, every whispered word, tonight it all had weight. Not because it broke me, but because it was building something inside me. I looked down at the keys in my hand. My thumb traced the emblem, cold metal against warm skin. If I touched that wheel tonight, it wouldn't be to prove myself to him. It would be to remind myself who I really was. For the first time that evening, I let myself smile. Not a big one, just enough to make Orville's eyes narrow. I didn't move toward the car. I didn't speak. The silence stretched between us, thick as tar. In that silence, something shifted, not in the room, but in me. The humiliation wasn't fading, but it was hardening into something else, a quiet defiance. A decision taking shape like steel cooling. Venora whispered my name. I didn't answer. I kept my eyes on the Ferrari, on its curves and edges until they blurred. It wasn't a car anymore. It was a line in the sand. The crowd waited for me to make a fool of myself. I didn't. I simply stood there, holding the keys, every second stretching longer, heavier. The laughter began to waver. Someone coughed. The string quartet faltered on a note before picking up again. I could feel Orville's impatience rising. He wanted a scene. He wanted me small. Instead, I gave him nothing. That nothing scared him more than any outburst could have. I shifted my weight, squared my shoulders, and tucked the keys into my palm. My voice stayed locked in my throat, but inside my head it was clear. This isn't over. And as the laughter roared around me, a memory I'd buried for years clawed its way back to the surface. And as the laughter roared around me, a memory I'd buried for years clawed its way back to the surface, not in fragments, but whole. The scent of gas and motor oil hit me before I even realized I was drifting. The laughter faded, blurred, and gave way to the soft clang of metal tools against concrete. I was 12 again, back in that old garage behind my uncle's trailer in southern Illinois, where the nights were humid and the stars felt too far away. The place was barely standing, roof patched with tin, the floor stained with decades of sweat, rust, and spilled oil. But to me, it was a cathedral. Uncle Wayne was hunched over the hood of a '78 Ford Bronco, sleeves rolled, hands black with grease. He didn't say much most nights, just worked, and I'd sit cross-legged near the toolbox, watching every move. He knew what every sound meant. The cough of a loose spark plug, the whine of a bad belt, the uneven purr of a misfiring cylinder. He could hear all of it. And one day, he started showing me how to hear it too. "Hand me that half-inch socket, Arliss," he'd say without looking up. I'd scramble to grab it, eager not to disappoint. Sometimes I gave him the wrong one, and he'd just hold it up, wiggle it in the air, and grin. Close, but close don't crank the engine. That garage was where I learned how to listen, to machines, to people, to silence. That mattered more than I ever knew back then. The night that came back to me now wasn't special at first. The cicadas were screaming. A box fan was rattling in the corner, barely moving the thick summer air. I was standing over the engine bay, squinting into the guts of a Dodge Dakota with a cracked radiator. "You ever feel small?" I asked him. Uncle Wayne looked over from under the car. "Why, someone say something to you?" I shrugged. "Just at school. Coach told me I'd never make the team. Said kids like me don't finish things." He crawled out, sat up, wiped his hands on a rag already black from use. "Kids like you?" "Yeah, the ones that don't wear the right shoes or live in the right house." He looked at me for a long second, then stood and walked over to his workbench. He picked up a rusted carburetor, held it out. "You see this?" I nodded. "It's busted. Rusted out, clogged. But if you clean it, replace a few parts, get it breathing again, it runs. Good as new." He paused. "People, they're the same way. They get labeled broken, but that don't mean they stay that way." I remember him leaning closer, voice low. "Someday, knowing how to fix what's broken will be worth more than any car you can't buy." That night, I fell asleep on the bench, grease on my shirt, his words echoing in my chest. I didn't know it then, but he was handing me something more than knowledge. He was giving me armor, and in that ballroom, 25 years later, I needed it more than ever. The sound of glasses clinking snapped me back. The ballroom lights were too bright again. The crowd still watching. The Ferrari still glowing in the center of the room like some kind of false god. And Orville? He stood just a few feet away, smug as ever, waiting for me to fold. He thought he'd thrown me into a pit. What he really did was crack open a door I hadn't dared touch in decades. I looked down at the keys still resting in my hand. I didn't need to prove anything to him. I'd already done the hard work. On engines. On myself. The old man didn't know it, but what he just handed me wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation to remember who I really was. I took a step toward the Ferrari, not out of pride, but out of clarity. And when I lifted my eyes from the floor, I realized Orville wasn't done. He was just getting started. I blinked, the memory of my uncle's garage fading like smoke from a dying engine. And when I lifted my eyes from the floor, I realized Orville wasn't done. He was just getting started. He took another step forward, his voice louder now, cutting through the clinking of champagne glasses and the soft murmurs of the guests. The chandeliers above cast halos on his silver hair, but there was nothing angelic about the words coming out of his mouth. "You know," he began, raising his glass casually, "when Juniper first brought you around, I thought, maybe it's a phase. A charity project, maybe. Lord knows she always had a soft spot for broken things." Laughter rippled through a cluster of nearby guests. Not the kind of laughter you share over a good joke. No, this was sharper, meaner, the kind that made you feel like the punchline. "She said you'd been laid off," Orville continued, shaking his head with mock pity. "3 times? Or was it 4? I lose count when it's not Wall Street numbers." I heard someone cough awkwardly. Another sipped their drink a little too fast. Still, no one said a word in my defense. They just stood there, watching, like it was some perverse theater. My eyes found Juniper. She stood near the edge of the crowd, hands clasped, eyes flicking between me and her father. Her lips were parted like she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. And just like that, I knew she wouldn't stop him. Not tonight. The burn of shame was familiar now, but different this time. I wasn't crumbling. I was calibrating. I looked around slowly, scanning the room. The faces blurred together, a mosaic of privilege and performance. I noticed the smirks, the polite gasps. Some guests turned away as if they were embarrassed, for me, or maybe for themselves. Others leaned in closer, eager for more. Orville kept going. She wanted a man, Arliss, someone who could provide, lead, not some grease monkey trying to play dress up at a party he doesn't belong to. Grease monkey. That one stung more than it should have, but instead of reacting, I let the word settle. And then I remembered something else. My uncle's voice, firm and quiet in my ear. Fix what's broken, or they'll always call you broken. I closed my eyes for half a beat, breathed deep. Then, calmly, I turned to Orville. Careful, I said, just that. One word. Calm, but solid. He arched an eyebrow. What was that? I met his eyes fully now. You're about to call me a failure for the last time. The room hushed, not completely, but enough. The kind of silence that happens when people aren't sure if they should stay or slip away. He tilted his head, lips curling into a smirk. Is that so? It is, I said, steady. I may not wear the same suit or throw around stock tips at the club, but I've built things, real things, with my hands, with my back. I've fixed what other men threw away. His laugh came fast and loud. You? Threatening me? What have you got, Arliss? A box of tools and a sob story? He waved his hand like he was brushing away lint. You'll always be a footnote, a mistake in my daughter's rebellion phase. More laughter. This time it didn't sting. It just sounded hollow. Even the chucklers didn't believe it the way they did 10 minutes ago. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The words I'd spoken weren't a threat. They were a boundary, and it had been a long time since I'd set one. In that moment, the word failure drifted through the air again, unspoken but heavy. And for the first time, I didn't flinch. I didn't absorb it like a bruise. I watched it float past me like a feather in a storm, because I knew who I was. And he was about to find out too. But if he thought my warning was empty, he was about to learn how wrong he was. The ballroom lights had barely dimmed before I knew. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. While the laughter of Orville's guests still echoed in my head like a cruel chorus, morning came with something colder than humiliation, calculated betrayal. I was sitting at the small desk in our guest house, technically still on Orville's estate, nursing a bitter coffee when my phone buzzed. The subject line on the email from the attorney hit harder than any insult last night. Foundation Documentation Amendment. Immediate execution required. I opened the attached PDF and my eyes scanned the lines quickly. My name that I'd signed onto those plans, those board minutes, those grueling late-night meetings, was gone. Vanished like it had never existed. In its place, Juniper's, sole representative. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a legal oversight, something some assistant in Orville's orbit had botched. But then I scrolled to the bottom of the document. There it was, revised per directive of Orville L. Whitmore, principal benefactor. I didn't even put the coffee cup down. I stood, grabbed my jacket, and walked out the door. The mansion was already awake. Landscapers were trimming hedges with mechanical precision, and two women in tennis skirts laughed as they passed me on the path toward the courts. I ignored them, ignored the rising sun hitting the marble pillars, and pushed through the heavy double doors leading to Orville's office wing. His assistant, a woman with perfect posture and eyes that never blinked, opened her mouth to protest, but one look at me, and she sat back down without a word. I walked straight in. He was at his desk, back turned, watching birds gather by the fountain through those tall glass windows like he owned the very sky. Without turning, he said, "You're up early. You stole my name off my own work." That got him. He slowly swiveled in his chair, a smug smile already forming like he'd been waiting for this moment. "It was never your work, Arliss," he said, cool as a bank vault. "I bankrolled that foundation, paid every consultant, every architect, every permitting fee. You were just the face I let tag along." I stepped closer. "You replaced me with Juniper." He leaned back. "She's family, and she won't embarrass us in front of donors." I felt something crack, not loud, not visible, but deep, like a stress fracture in steel. I had given that project my nights, my sweat, my name, and now it was gone, just a line deleted in a legal form. I took a breath, tried to find something steady inside myself. "You could have told me." "I just did," he replied, glancing at his Rolex, "and frankly, I expected more gratitude. Juniper gets the prestige, you get peace and quiet. Sounds like a fair trade." That's when I heard her, behind me, just outside the office. "Juniper?" I turned. She didn't come in. Just stood there in the hall, arms folded tightly across her chest. Her face was pale, eyes distant. She'd heard it all, every word. "You knew?" I asked her. She opened her mouth and then closed it. Said nothing. Say something. But she didn't. She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She just stood there, like she wanted to vanish. I turned back to Orville. "You've always hated that I didn't beg, that I didn't kneel to kiss the hand that fed me." He shrugged. "You mistake tolerance for generosity, and you've exhausted both." I walked toward the desk, leaned in just enough for him to hear the edge in my voice. "You just made this war yours, Orville. I won't be your shadow anymore. You don't get to erase me." He chuckled. "I already did." I looked back at Juniper one last time. "You had a chance," I said to her softly, "to choose right. But silence is a choice too." I turned and left without waiting for a response. Because whatever we had, it cracked that morning. I didn't slam the door. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. But something in me shifted. I wasn't going to protect peace anymore if it meant burying myself under it. And when I thought I'd reached the bottom, Orville found a new way to drag me lower. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of silence, stares across dinner tables, and an unspoken question hanging in the space between me and Juniper. Whose side are you on? She didn't say much. I didn't ask much. And maybe that's what broke us faster than anything Orville had planned. That Thursday, I flew to Chicago. I'd been told, formally, coldly, that my presence was requested at a quarterly strategy meeting for the Whitmore Equity Group, the kind of meeting I used to help lead. Back when I still believed I was building something. Downtown was gray that day. Even the skyline looked indifferent. When the elevator doors opened on the 27th floor, a secretary with perfect nails and a frozen smile guided me to the boardroom. I'd been in that room before, only this time everything felt off. The chairs were all filled. Men in suits, women with diamond watches and eyes that didn't blink. Conversations paused the moment I stepped inside. No one smiled. No one greeted me. Except Orville. He stood at the head of the table like a general surveying his troops. "Arliss," he said, "you made it. Good." He motioned toward the only empty seat, at the far end, away from the screen, away from the voice of the room. I walked slowly, knowing full well what this was. A setup. The meeting kicked off. Numbers, charts, a string of jargon dressed up as strategy. I sat still, silent, listening, waiting. My instincts screamed, but I kept my face calm. Then it came. "As of today," Orville said, his voice measured like a courtroom judge, We're simplifying equity and decision-making roles within our major holdings. He held up a folder, leather-bound, gold-edged. This document finalizes a restructuring, and I'd like to make something clear to everyone here. He turned, locking eyes with me. Effective immediately, Arliss has no financial stake in Whitmore Equities, nor does he hold any voting power. While we appreciate his involvement in the past, we move forward without him. He looked around, his voice louder now. Gentlemen and ladies, from this point on, my son-in-law is merely a guest in this room. The silence hit harder than his words. No one objected. No one spoke. Some looked at their phones. Others shifted uncomfortably. But no one stood for me. Not even Juniper, seated 2 chairs down. Her hands were folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes didn't meet mine. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. My pulse pounded like a warning bell. I said nothing. What was there to say? They'd already erased me. Legally, financially, socially. This wasn't just humiliation. It was execution. My fists curled beneath the table. I stared down at the polished wood grain, willing myself not to explode. I thought about the nights I stayed up drafting proposals, the weekends I gave up, the favors I called in. All of it, gone with a line of ink and a smug smile. It wasn't just money he stole. It was the last piece of respect I thought I still had. I glanced again at Juniper. Her jaw was tight, her shoulders tense, but she didn't move. She didn't say my name. And that silence, that choice, cut deeper than all the rest. Orville leaned back, satisfied, as if he'd just closed a deal instead of a door. But I didn't give him the show. No anger, no pleading, just one long breath. Because even now, buried under the weight of it all, I felt something colder than despair begin to stir. A quiet clarity, a final line drawn. Let him think I was done. Let them all believe they'd stripped me bare, because the man they tried to erase was still standing. And just when Orville thought I was defeated, he struck harder, unaware he was sharpening the blade that would cut him down. The invitation arrived like a slap dressed in silk, hand-delivered, engraved, sealed with that Whitmore crest that always seemed more like a branding iron than a logo. Family Appreciation Evening, it read, with Orville's signature flourish below. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. A week had passed since the boardroom ambush, but the sting hadn't dulled. If anything, it had settled in deeper, like a splinter beneath the skin I couldn't reach. Juniper had said nothing about it. Not the meeting, not her father, not me. At home, we moved around each other like ghosts, sharing space, but not breath. Still, I showed up that night. The garden at Orville's estate was bathed in golden light from candles flickering in lanterns hanging from trees. String lights arched overhead like constellations forced into neat rows. Waiters in white gloves floated among guests, trays of champagne and oysters balanced like trophies. The music was soft, jazzy, too elegant to match the tension I felt in my chest. I stood near the outer hedges, nursing a glass of water, avoiding conversations. Everyone else mingled with practiced ease. Cousins I barely knew, board members in cocktail attire, and the same circle of socialites who nodded politely without ever using my name. I noticed Juniper across the lawn, standing beside her aunt, nodding distractedly. She caught my eye for half a second. Then she looked away, and then, as if on cue, Orville stepped up to a small podium by the fountain. He tapped his glass, drawing everyone's attention like a preacher before the sermon. I want to thank all of you, he began smoothly, for being here tonight, and more importantly, for being part of a family that's built not just wealth, but legacy. The crowd hummed with approval. I've been fortunate, he continued, to help carry many along this journey. Some of you started with nothing. Some of you married into it. But all of you, in one way or another, have benefited from the name we share. I felt it coming, like a storm rolling in under clear skies. And tonight, he said, lifting his glass higher, I'd like to raise a toast to the ones we've carried when they couldn't carry themselves. Laughter bubbled from a few mouths. Others just smiled, unsure. But I saw where it landed. I saw the eyes shift toward me. He went on. Some people mistake opportunity for talent. They forget that being given a seat at the table doesn't mean they built the table. Sometimes you extend grace, shelter, resources, even a last name, and still they call it earned. My heart pounded, my jaw clenched, but I didn't move. And when those people falter, he said with a smirk, you don't punish them. You remind them, gently, that without the family's support, they were never more than hopeful passengers on a train they didn't buy a ticket for. It was so smooth, so polished. Every insult lacquered in courtesy. Then came the final strike. Orville gestured toward a set of plaques arranged near the garden wall. These represent the milestones our family has reached. The Whitmore Scholarship, the Business Incubator, the Arts Fund. Some of you might have heard names attached to these. But I want to clarify something tonight. He walked up to one of the plaques, one I knew too well. I'd named it. I'd written the pitch. I'd knocked on doors to make it happen. He placed his hand on it like a prize fighter claiming a belt. These weren't his creations, he said, voice rising just enough to stir the wind. They were mine. Every dime, every inch, every accolade, it all came from this house. And just like that, he erased me. I couldn't breathe. The guests clapped, light, polite, but enough to confirm they'd swallowed it. I scanned the crowd. No one questioned him. No one blinked. Not even Juniper. Especially not Juniper. And something inside me, something that had held on through every cut before, finally cracked. But not the way he wanted. It wasn't rage. It wasn't grief. It was clarity. He thought he'd killed me with kindness, dressed his cruelty in silk and string lights. But I saw it now. Every lie he told was for them, not for me. And every time he spoke, he forgot the one thing his pride couldn't protect. Who else was listening? He was so busy burying me with words, he never looked down to see where he was standing. I didn't speak that night. I didn't toast back. I let the laughter roll past me like a wave, but I didn't drown, because that night, as he laughed at his own lie, I began planning the moment I'd silence him for good. That night, as he laughed at his own lie, I began planning the moment I'd silence him for good. And 2 nights later, I walked into the same ballroom where he first crushed me in front of everyone. But this time, I didn't walk in with my shoulders hunched or my pride wounded. I walked in ready. The place looked identical to that night months ago. Crystal chandeliers casting warm pools of light across polished marble, waiters gliding through the crowd with glasses of wine and delicate hors d'oeuvres, guests dressed in tailored tuxedos and shimmering gowns posed for photographers, their laughter echoing off gilded columns. But under the glitz, tension pulsed like a second heartbeat. I stood near the edge of the room, blending into the background just long enough to watch him make his entrance. Orville, in a black tuxedo that probably cost more than I made in my first year teaching. He worked the room like a king returning from war, shaking hands, making jokes. The arrogance hadn't faded. It had grown. He spotted me, didn't smile, didn't nod, just narrowed his eyes like he had already won again. But I stayed where I was, calm. Let him come to me. The gala was meant to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the Whitmore Foundation. Orville's name was everywhere, on the banners, the brochures, even the ice sculpture in the shape of a lion. His version of legacy. I didn't touch the wine. I didn't mingle. I waited. An hour in, the music dipped, and the host invited Orville to the stage. He stepped up with his usual polish and presence, raising a glass to a sea of eager eyes. The applause rolled through the room like thunder. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, voice warm, almost humble. "It's no secret that the Whitmore Foundation has changed lives, thousands of them. And tonight, I want to take a moment to thank someone who's been along for the ride, even if he stumbled here and there." He turned slightly, right toward me. "Arliss," he said, that smile so rehearsed it could have been carved from ice. "I know things haven't always gone your way, but I believe in second chances, even third ones. You've given us some unforgettable lessons, haven't you?" Some laughter. A few heads turned toward me. Others whispered, just like before, and then he said it. "A man with nothing can't lose much, can he?" The room fell quiet enough for the ice to crack. I took a deep breath. My heart beat steady. I stepped forward, not fast, not dramatic, just enough to reach the foot of the stage. "No," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. "But a man with nothing to lose can't be bought or silenced." Orville froze. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the folder, the one with copies of contracts, original email chains, time-stamped documents, and I handed it to the host. "Before we continue," I said, "I think everyone here deserves to know how this foundation really came to be." The host looked confused, then flipped the first page. I watched his brows rise with each turn. Gasps followed. Whispers turned to murmurs. The projector behind Orville flickered to life as I handed over a flash drive. Images of blueprints with my signature, emails from Orville's assistant confirming my authorship, bank transfers traced to shell accounts Orville had hidden, funds taken under my name. The room shifted. Then came the recording. My voice, months ago, on a call with the Foundation's lawyer, questioning Orville's move to remove me. The lawyer had slipped, admitting, "You were listed as co-founder, but Orville ordered your removal to consolidate control." It played through the speakers like a verdict. Orville's face drained of color. He stepped back from the mic, blinking like he'd just been slapped. Juniper stood near the edge of the crowd. She didn't cry. She didn't run. But she didn't defend him either. I turned back to the crowd. Everything he built was with stolen bricks. From me. From others you haven't met. But you know what's worse than theft? I paused. Erasing someone's name and calling it generosity. No applause, just silence. And in that silence, Orville lowered his head. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. In that moment, the word failure didn't belong to me anymore. It hung in the air around him, heavy, ugly, and earned. I didn't gloat, didn't smirk. I just stood there, feeling my breath steady, the room no longer spinning. He had tried to bury me. Instead, he buried himself. And yet, even in victory, I knew the scars he left on me would not fade overnight. That thought followed me home like a shadow I couldn't shake. It had been 3 weeks since the gala. 3 weeks since the room full of silk ties and sequined gowns watched Orville fall, not from a window or a ledge, but from grace. His empire cracked under the pressure of truth. Investors pulled out. The media called it the collapse of a dynasty. I just called it Tuesday. Now the silence in my apartment was different, not hollow, not empty, just still. The early sun leaked through the threadbare curtains, catching the rising steam from the coffee mug on the table. I stood by the window, barefoot, wrapped in a flannel shirt I hadn't worn since grad school. It didn't smell like cologne or leather, just clean laundry and old stories. There was no staff bringing me coffee, no private chef prepping a 3-course breakfast, just the hum of a fridge that occasionally groaned like it hated being old. I didn't miss the mansion. What I missed was harder to name. Maybe it was the version of me that still believed I could earn Orville's respect. That naive part of me finally felt quiet now. I sipped the coffee. It was a little bitter, but I didn't mind. I had brewed it myself. A knock at the door. I didn't move right away. Just stared at the doorknob for a second too long. Then I opened it. Juniper stood there. Her coat swallowed her shoulders, and her hair was pulled back like she hadn't slept well. Her eyes searched mine like she didn't know if she should smile or cry. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She didn't say anything for a while, just walked into the kitchen, rubbed her hands together like the chill was still clinging to her skin, and sat across from my half-finished cup. "I heard you moved here," she finally said, voice thin. Didn't think it was true. "I like the quiet," I replied. She nodded. "It's different from the estate." "Exactly." Juniper glanced at the window. "They're coming for him, you know. Lawsuits, audits, the board's cutting ties." I said nothing. "I should have stopped him," she whispered, fingers tightening around the cup I handed her. I knew what he was doing. Maybe not everything, but enough. I just froze. Silence stretched between us, not awkward, but aching. "When I needed you most," I said, my voice steady, "you stayed quiet. You didn't have to choose sides. You just had to speak." "I know." I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't the polished woman from those black tie events. She was human now, raw, honest. "I wasn't just hurt," I continued. "I felt erased, like I never mattered at all. And coming from the woman I loved, that silence, it didn't just hurt. It destroyed something." Juniper's eyes shimmered. "Is it too late to fix it?" I stared down at the wrench on the table. Old, worn, smooth, at the grip. My uncle gave it to me when I was 13. We used it to fix a busted radiator in the back of his garage, long before I ever knew the taste of caviar or the sting of shame. That wrench had more to do with who I was than any of Orville's cars, suits, or contracts. "I'm not going back," I said quietly. She looked up, confused. "Back where?" "To the estate, the name, the performance." She didn't argue. "I'm tired of proving my worth in someone else's language. I want to speak in mine now." Juniper blinked away the tears. She nodded once, slowly, like she understood. Maybe for the first time. I stood, walked toward the window. The city below was just waking up. Delivery trucks, joggers, the smell of bakery bread riding the wind. I opened the window a crack, letting the cool morning air sweep in. It smelled nothing like the polished scent of Orville's cologne. It smelled like freedom. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need an apology wrapped in guilt. I had what mattered: my name, my peace, my silence. And that silence was no longer the mark of someone defeated. It was the sound of someone choosing. I turned back, placed the wrench next to the coffee mug, deliberately, gently. A relic, yes, but more than that. A reminder. He called me failure, but failure is forgetting who you are. I never will again. And as I stepped into the sunlight, I realized silence wasn't my weakness. It had been my greatest weapon all along.